Hello, this is Graphic Policy Radio, and this is your host, Ilana Levin. And this is a comics podcast. This is a comics podcast for the kind of folks who love their stories with superheroes, especially queer superheroes, whether they come from our corner of the galaxy or a distant, distant star. Joining me on the show today is Jadzia Axelrod, she of the greatest name in comics. Hello, welcome to the show.
Hello. I'm very excited to be here.
Yay. Her bio, for those who might not know already, is she is an author, an illustrator, and a world changer. Throughout her eventful life, she has been a circus performer, a puppeteer, a graphic designer, a sculptor, a costume designer, and a fellow podcaster, and quite a few other things, but she's lost track. With the writer business at the heart of it, though, Jadzia is the author of Galaxy, the Prettiest Star, a new graphic novel illustrated by Jess Taylor and published by DC Comics, which has just been nominated for a GLAAD Award.
Yay!
I know, I was very excited to hear it. She is the author and illustrator behind Frankenstein's support group for Misunderstood Monsters, a comic about monsters and feelings for Quirk Books, a lot of which is on her website you can check out. She is also the writer and producer of award-winning podcast, The Voice of Free Planet X, where she interviews stranded time travelers, low-rent superheroes, unrepentant monsters, and other such creature of sci-fi and fantasy, as well as the podcasts Aliens You Will Meet and Fables of the Flying City. The story started in Fables of the Flying City is concluded in The Battle of Blood and Ink, a graphic novel published by Tor. She is not domestic. She is a luxury, and in that sense, necessary. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I love your bio. It goes to show folks, like, you will make more interesting comics when you do many interesting things in your life, not just the one thing. And that, we all have different routes and paths to getting here. How did you get into comics as a reader and then as a creator?
I've always been into comics since I was able to read. I was a huge fan of the Super Friends television show as a small child. I had all the toys. I had the Justice League playset. And one day I was at a yard sale with my father and I saw a Flash comic book. And I was like, I need this. It's a comic book about my favorite character from Super Friends, please. And that particular issue of Flash has a scene where the Flash has to be the Flash and Barry Allen at the same time in front of a person. It's to prove that he's not a murderer, but it doesn't really matter. What's right. Important part is he has to go to his own apartment and answer the door as Barry Allen while standing next to this woman as the Flash. And he does that by running super fast, so fast that no one can see, back and forth, taking off his costume, putting on a bathrobe, taking off the bathrobe, putting on the costume again, and just doing that super fast so that the after image of both allows him to literally talk to himself. And I was so blown away by this as a small child, just that this could happen. And also the way it was illustrated on the page, it, I think, broke my head a little bit. And that made comics my favorite medium going forward. And as you said, when you talk about my bio, I've done a lot of other things, but I keep going back to comics because it is a medium that I love and that I feel you can do incredible things with. That you can't do in other mediums.
I've always kind of been a Speedster fan myself. I'd love to know, like, what do you think was it that appealed to you about Flash in particular as a kid, as well as that scene?
I'm not entirely sure. I think there's something to be said for how relatively grounded super speed is as a superpower. Like, everyone can run. And so, like, the idea of, like, what you can do, but really fast has a different sort of power fantasy than, like, being able to fly or shoot lasers out of your eyes or have a magical wishing ring. Like, there's a different level of, it's a lot closer, I guess. So that may be part of the appeal. Also, the costume is great.
It is a great costume.
Can we just say, like, it's one of the best superhero costumes. Like, it's all red. It's got the lightning bolt belt. It's got those cool Mercury things over the ears, yellow boots. It's like just a great costume.
Yes, there's a reason why they, like, basically never change it in a world where so many get changed,
I would say that Jess Chambers, when they become Flash, and it has the black in it. That's, I think, a better Flash costume. But it says something that it took us like 60 years to get a better Flash costume.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps the lightning bolt prefiguring what mayhaps would become a later interest in the works of David Bowie.
It's true. I have been attracted to that shape all my life.
Same. That's so funny. So how did you start writing comics? You were writing and drawing when you began, right? Or
yeah, like I have notebooks from when I was, first grade, maybe even kindergarten, where I was drawing. Yeah, kindergarten, where I was just drawing comics. And like the comics of that time that I was drawing was essentially funny animals. They were, it was about a raccoon who wore a baseball cap all the time and went to high school. For some reason, I don't know why I put it in a high school as a kindergartner. It just seemed like the coolest thing to do, I guess.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And just had relationships with other things. And they were supposed to be funny. I don't think any of them ever were, but I didn't care. I was drawing them and having fun. So I was always drawing and writing comics, even from the beginning. And I would do that. I did that all through grade school, did it all through middle school, did it all through high school. And continued in college. And then after, like, I've always been doing this. I've always been doing this to various levels of personal success as far as how I felt doing them. But it's just something I've always done and keep going back to. Like I step away from them for a while. Like I've got really into podcasting. I wanted to do more theater stuff. There's always been times when I'm like, I'm not going to do comics. And then I end up picking it back up because it's a medium that always entrances me. And it's one I love writing and drawing in.
Well, you're not my only friend who's a comics person who also has done work in puppetry, actually.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. This feels really different to me because 3D is just like creating things in physical space is always, there's this whole like added level of like, will this thing that I have made literally fall apart before it is utilized?
Sure. Well, I think for me, a lot of making art is problem solving, and that's what excites me. It's why I love writing stories, because that's all it is problem solving, where you create a problem and then you have to create characters who solve it. And then how do we solve the problem of like, this character isn't working quite right, or this setting is, and all that stuff. Like, it's all problem solving. It's all Legos. It's all like, how does this piece fit? And like building puppets is very similar. And it's like, how do we make this thing that is not alive act and look and behave like it is, enough that people are entertained, not necessarily convinced, but entertained. And like, that's a whole nother set of problem solving. And that's why that's attractive to me.
Yeah. How did you get interested in puppets as a medium too, though?
I mean, I've always been interested. It's, again, like, these are things that I've carried with me from childhood. My parents were very encouraging of all my weird creative needs. And like, they took me to puppet workshops, and they took me to panels where people talk about making movies. And they took me to all these things that instilled a awareness of how these things happen, right? I think one thing I really like about what my parents did growing up is that they really noticed that I was interested in how things worked. And they went out of their way to show me how things worked. And if they couldn't do it, then they took me to someone who could. And that was something that they did throughout my entire childhood. And to really be like, this is how these things are made. This is how these things are put together. It's not just something that happens and then you enjoy it. Like, there are people behind it, and this is how they do that, because I know you're interested in that. And that was really gave me a groundwork, because now when I do my own creative stuff, like, I don't have a lot of the anxiety I've heard other creators have, where it's like, people are going to be upset because they're going to learn I'm not a god. And it's like, yeah, no, I know I'm not a god. I know creators are not gods. I've met them. It's okay. It's fine. We're all allowed to be fallible and human and all this stuff. And that's what makes our stuff great. But yeah, from an early age, it was like, this is how these things work. Is this still interesting to you now that you know how it's made? And I was like, even more so.
That's really cool. Thank you. Well, what's the story behind the Galaxy graphic novel? How did that come to be? How did that come to be at DC? They have this really interesting line, for those who don't know, of like YA graphic novels that are sort of standalone. And this sort of was part of that line, right?
Yes. Yeah. Galaxy's a funny beast because at the time it was not, they weren't doing original characters when I pitched. Mm-hmm. And what happened was, this is all like, people ask me, how did you break into comics? And what they mean by that is, how did you break into one of the big two comics, not how you break into comics, because how you break into comics is you make comics, and there you've broken in. But like, how did you get one of the largest publishers to publish your stuff? And it was one of those things where a lot of luck happened, and I was just prepared when that opportunity knocked, because it was like, my agent at the time was talking to Michelle Wells, who was the editor of the YA line at the time. And she was trying to do this YA line. It was very early in the thing. Like, I think they had only had 2 books come out at this time, because this was a while ago. It took a long time for Galaxy to get made because of the pandemic and all sorts of things. But they had gotten a lot of big name YA and middle grade authors. And they were looking for people who were less expensive, essentially, who were not as famous. And she talked to my agent at the time and is like, we're really looking for people who know these characters and know this world, but have a different point of view. And my agent at the time turned to her and said, have I got the girl for you? And we had an email conversation, and we had a phone call, and then I sent them 5 pitches, 4 of which was like, this is probably what they're going to do. And then at the bottom was the pitch that would turn into Galaxy. And that was the one they liked. And it was the pitch that was like, I'm going to kick myself if I don't put in a trans hero in this. Like, and there's not really a trans hero. I mean, there's trans characters. There's plenty of trans characters, but there's not a trans superhero per se, because this was before even Nicole Maines was on television as Dreamer. And I was like, but I'm gonna put this in, and hopefully they'll go for it. I didn't even think they were. I thought they were going to pick the one where a teenage Lex Luthor takes over a boarding school. Like, that was the one I thought they were going to pick. Right. But no, they picked Galaxy, and they were willing to develop it as an original character. And they've since developed other original characters. Like, they clearly had this in mind, because there were others that came out before us. But it was like, for the longest time, DC had a embargo on new characters. Like, people weren't allowed to make new characters at DC Comics. And one of the things Michelle was excited about was breaking that and bringing in new types of characters and new types of situations for those characters. And Galaxy fit that bill perfectly.
Because there really is this difference between protagonists and like people who are in somebody else's cast, you know?
Yes. So when we talk about the DC Book of Pride, we can talk about that, because writing that book radicalized me. But yes, there's a lot of difference between a character who gets the whole book about them.
Yes.
Who gets all the page time, and then a character who like will get a scene and then they don't show up for like 6 months because the major crossover happens, and then they show up again and their lives are radically different, and like something happened to them in between those 6 months that we didn't see them. But we'll never know, because it's not their story. Or they're exactly the same, and the hero will have gone through all of these changes, and the side character will still just be that person they were at the beginning.
That's such a good point, yeah.
Because, we don't follow them, so their lives don't move. So Galaxy was going to be a queer trans character right off the bat. And I think what attracted to them was a lot of things. Obviously, one is that I'm a great writer, so obviously they wanted to work with me. But one of the things I think they liked was that it was a character who was both trans in reality and trans in metaphor, and that it could work, because we've seen a lot of characters that are trans in metaphor, and that
Yeah.
turn out to be not really trans in the text, but like you can see them as trans. And so to have a character who is both, had that metaphorical element, so that people who are not necessarily trans feminine could still see themselves in her, but also still have the trans feminine journey, I think was something that was very attractive.
Yeah, like I wanted to tell people, I know you might assume that this is just a trans character in terms of their supernaturally trans, but she is also trans. It's both.
Right.
It's both guys. Yeah.
And I think that has tripped up some readers. And, I don't know what to say about that, but like, I have noticed that a lot of people who are not trans feminine, and this is non-binary, this is trans masculine, and this is cis people, have all talked to me about how much they identify with the character. And I'm not certain that would have happened if we hadn't done the metaphorical fantasy element. I think it allowed us to talk in broad enough strokes that people could see what was going on, but also still keep the realism of the trans experience, I think. I mean, like, I'm biased. Yeah. I think it's great.
Mm-hmm. I do too. I mean, but like, I think it's so great that she also is like actually also trans in the real human way, because it used to just be metaphor. Like that was all people were allowed to do for such a long time. Right. So let's talk about the core story for folks who haven't read it yet of Galaxy.
Right. So it's about our heroine, Galaxy. She's a space princess in exile, and she's come to Earth. And she, in order to hide out, her appearance is transformed so that she looks human, but also on top of that, she looks like a human boy. She's been that way for years. And it is not until Kat, the new girl, shows up and they start a relationship that disguise, that persona becomes too hard to keep up. And she wants to be who she truly is.
And it's very much like a romance and relationship centered story, but
yes,
one with a really strong sci-fi setting.
Mm-hmm. I would say that's true. Yeah, it's a romantic comedy that has sci-fi and superhero elements, and there's also a talking dog.
Yes, he's very cute.
I love Argus.
Yeah. I think one of the really powerful pieces of the metaphor is the metaphor of the jewel near her heart, which is what keeps her in this human boy form, and how it's causing this pain there. That felt really effective.
Yeah, that was like early on in the writing process. It's like I need her to have something deep inside that causes her a lot of pain, and it's a physical thing. And then when she transforms into her true self, that pain just goes away. And like that, having her have a jewel, something that's beautiful, but also difficult to hold on to. Because of where it is and how it is and what she has and how she has to hide it to live in this society. It just was something that came together really quickly.
And how the adult in her life, like can't fathom why this could be a problem.
Right. Because he doesn't have a jewel in his chest. Like she has that because she's the princess. And she's special. And like the other people she's with, her human, in quotes, family, like they've all been transformed from their original selves, but they don't have what she has. And so they don't understand what she's going through.
Mm-hmm. And you definitely are doing a lot of work, like showing how this alien family feels the need that it has to perform as this like perfect nuclear human suburban white bread family in order to survive. And like, it sort of seems clear how like, she's not the only person who's suffering from that, but she's very much suffering from it in a way that some of the other characters really don't understand. Certainly the other adult doesn't even realize he's suffering, but her older brother does realize he's suffering and just manifests this in a lot of resentment. And it just feels like, yeah, this nuclear family thing that's being forced on them is really harmful for everybody involved, come to think of it, but also especially for the trans character.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, one of the things I love about the cast of this book is like, it's really like, I like them. I like them all. And I like being able to spend time with them and get into their heads. And so like, I have a real sympathy for everyone who is in the book. Maybe not Buck, but like everyone else. Yes. and to really like delve into like how they would feel. 'Cause this is the interesting thing to me about these kind of stories. And this is why I love superhero comics and why I love science fiction in general and fantasy genre is like, I love giant ideas. Sure, those are fun. But really what is interesting to me is how do people react in these giant ideas? Like when you are an alien in disguise on Earth, how does that make you feel? How does it feel to have something powerful and wonderful about yourself that you have to hide for whatever reason? Like that's more fascinating to me than meeting a space god and having an adventure on the planet Mortov or whatever. Like let's talk about how you feel. That's fascinating. I'm a character-based writer. I get my jollies by like digging into these characters and figuring out what makes them tick and how they feel. And I really wanted Taylor's family to not feel like bad guys, right? Like they are not the best for certain, but they are not evil, and they are trying their best in a difficult situation. And sometimes when you're doing that, your best isn't good enough. And doesn't make you an evil person, but it does mean that you are doing harm. And I guess there's a difference between those two. And I really wanted to explore that.
Yeah. Yeah. I also really liked her relationship with Kat and Kat's mom. And this sort of supportive family that, just isn't super phased by the alien thing and think it's really cool, actually. I love the dialogue where like she's, leaning in to kiss and she's like, and Kat's like, I'm not into guys. And their response, I'm not a guy, is like, it's like one of those single panels that it means so much in context of the story, but it also is a meme.
Well, thank you. I love a good meme. Right.
I think it's really interesting, too, that they let this happen specifically in a YA book, which is, at one point in our lives, right, they would have been like, well, you could do this in an adult book, but no way in a YA. And now it feels like there's so much more queerness in YA than there often is in like more mainstream, not in like queer independent press, but in like more mainstream press. Like a lot of times there's more queer stuff in the YA than in the adult books.
Right. And I have heard from parents of even younger readers than traditional YA stuff, and they love it. And it's really affirming to them who are just exploring their gender and their sexuality and like having these questions. And part of that is, it's a very friendly book to pick up. Like the art is gorgeous.
It is.
And the writing is great. Again, I'm just going to toot my own horn. But it's about a girl and her talking dog and like all of this stuff that's traditionally like younger reader stuff, and that we've kind of put in a YA. We've mixed and matched with like some sort of younger fantasy stuff. We've done some older sexuality and gender stuff, and it all kind of comes together in this great YA sludge that I love to drink.
And this is a new setting. It's like, a new setting in DC. Like it's a world in which Superman exists. Superman is mentioned in a specific way. I actually really like how you handled that. We'll talk about that in a bit. But it's also like a new setting. So if somebody doesn't read DC Comics, they're not going to be confused.
Right. Well, that was one of the things I was really excited about writing DC, because there's all of these fictional geography, right? Like there's Metropolis and there's Coast City and there's Themyscira and there's Central City, right? All these fake areas. And I really wanted to contribute to that in a small way. So there was talk of like putting us in an established area like Smallville. And I pushed it back in that part because I wanted this to be separate from the larger narrative. And like once you put something in Smallville, you have to then ask, well, how does this fit with people who know about Superman? And I'm like, well, let's push it a little farther away. And people still know about Superman, but it's different when you're from Smallville. So I was able to create Ozma Gap, which is my own little corner of the DCU. And it just made me so happy to do that. And it doubly made me happy to see how Jess illustrated it. And I was like, this is perfect. Thank you. This is just what I wanted.
I just realized Ozma Gap kind of reminds me of Ozma from The Wizard of Oz.
Right, yeah.
I totally hadn't picked up on that until you said it out loud. Now I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, and there's one part where, like, an Ozma doll makes a very prominent appearance in a emotional moment. Like, that character has always fascinated me, because if you're familiar with her original appearance, she spends most of the story as Pip, a boy, and then is transformed back into her true self, Ozma, at the very end. And it's a very strange moment for her, because she has thought of herself as a boy the whole time, but also known that something wasn't right. And it's not surprising that many trans people have latched onto this narrative. And so part of this was to like take the Ozma narrative and like really invest in it, like a 21st century trans energy, and bring that. So Galaxy has a similar journey to Ozma, though I didn't reread the book because I didn't want to have that overly influence what I wanted to write. And because like, I didn't want you to be like, oh, here's how these characters line up with the Oz characters, because that's not the book I wanted to write. But I did want to like have some nods in there. So there's the Ozma in there. We say that the pizza place that everyone goes to is Mombi's, which is the witch that transforms Ozma into Pip. Like, there's all sorts of little bits and boops if you catch it.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. I'm not super familiar with the story. So, but I think that's a really cool reference, and such a queer to the core, like story and reference. So yeah, talk about the creation of your central character Galaxy, like working with the artist, developing the character design and all that.
Yeah. It's funny because like Jess nailed the characters on the first pass. Like they did a first pass of the group, and I was like, yeah, all of these are perfect. All of these are like, you did it. And then they did one of Galaxy in her alien form. And I was like, that's wrong. And we had to go back and forth a lot. And I had done a drawing of Galaxy way back before there was ever an artist attached, just so people would know what the character might look like as part of the pitch process. So I had an attachment of what I wanted the character to look like. And to Jess's credit, we're still very close to that. So thank you, Jess. But we went back and forth on a lot of how to present her body, how to present her alienness, because I did want her to be like not necessarily a physical representation of like a teenage trans girl who's early into hormones, but I did want her to be tall, and I wanted her to have broad shoulders, and I wanted that to be something that she deals with. And then we went back and forth on the horns because everything either felt derivative, right? Like this looks like an alien we've seen somewhere else, or it felt too into the fantasy genre. Because my original thing was something akin to antlers, and Jess was like, we're not doing antlers, because the moment we do antlers, they look like elves. And I'm like, all right, that's fair. That's fair. So we went back through like so many horn variations, and Jess came up with this wonderful one that like sticks out the back, but also has the like headphone thing over the top that could also look like a race car speeder. And I was like, this is great. I love this. This looks like nothing else I've ever seen. And then they did some cool variations of how like an adult version would look with lots of spires coming out. And I was like, this is beautiful. You've done it. Because it was a thing of like, we're not just designing a character, we're designing a race. And like, how does the whole race look compared to how Galaxy looks? And that was another thing that we went back and forth a lot on.
Well, I thought a lot about the horn sort of resembling a halo in like,
yeah,
too.
It says a lot, and it's such a great visual. It's not like anything we've ever seen on an alien before. And so I loved it. And it still makes her look human, which is also something I love, because we talked about maybe having her be a little more alien in the face. And I was pushing back against that because I wanted her to have a human-esque face. I was like, let's make this a Star Trek alien, not a Star Wars alien.
Yes.
And yeah, and I think she looks great. Like the moment I saw this design, I was like, this is it. This is the one. I love this so much. And it's been really great to then see fan art of this design and see how well it works in a lot of different styles, which is not something you can say about every character design. Like some people only works in the style that they do. And so to watch people who have a different style than Jess take it in either a more realistic or a more cartoony or more fluid and languid direction has been really fascinating and wonderful. I love all the fan art.
Yes, and please keep sharing the fan art. I know like how much creators appreciate seeing their original characters, you know. That's so cool. And yeah, I mean, and you have her love interest, which is another great character design.
Yeah, Kat's wonderful. I love Kat.
Everyone else in the story thinks so too, which I also like.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that always the way with new girls, though? Like, someone comes to town and it's like, oh my God, that's the most attractive person in the world because they're just not from here. Not that Kat is not attractive on her own way. She absolutely is. But, like, she's desirable because of her alienness. And that was something that was fun to play with a literal alien character.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, not to go into too much of a spoiler, but it's interesting to see there's one character who handles the alienness of meeting, you know, Kat, who is a young woman from Metropolis, in a very different way than he handles realizing Galaxy, who he's known all along, is also an alien.
Right.
Yeah. And that felt very real too.
Deliberate thing to put in.
Well, another piece also is, you know, Galaxy's like human boy. Yeah. Yeah. I think the story is really going to resonate with a lot of folks.
It certainly has seemed to. Like, I was not prepared for the response. Like, the week it came out, I got so many like emails and Twitter DMs and all sorts of things from people who had never seen themselves in a book before. And this is not to say that Galaxy is something brand new. Like, there's other characters similarly, and certainly other trans characters in other medium. I think what is new about Galaxy is because she's attached to DC Comics, she got a farther spread than some of those other stories. And that it was accessible to people in a way that other narratives that deal with this stuff has not been. Like, it means something that it's got the DC logo on the cover, and B, that DC pushed it. Like, they really pushed. I was surprised. Like, there was ads in all of their books. Like, they did a free comic book day. I was like, yeah, they did 3 free comic book days last year, and I was like, this is the tie-in to the Big Summer crossover. This is our tie-in to the Big Summer movie, and this is our gay trans original character that you don't know. I was like, it was amazing that they were doing that and they were pushing it. And I really, you hear so many horror stories of characters, of creators who are doing queer stuff and trans stuff, and it gets buried. Yeah. And it was just really great to feel like the publisher for this book was not ashamed of it and wanted it in people's hands. And it's gotten into people's hands, which has been amazing.
And again, like, you know, her being a protagonist really solidifies that. There was an episode of my podcast. There was writers on who had created a really awesome non-binary character in the cast of a major superhero. And we were talking about how great they were. But I also was like, I can't say it to them, but like, I know we're never going to see them again as soon as you guys stop writing this book, because like whoever's writing it next, like, they're probably not even doing their homework. And if they do, like, they're not going to prioritize this like really awesome cast member that you created. I really hope I see them again. But like, as a queer reader, like, we all know we're like probably not going to see them again. So it's, I mean, I guess there's also something about it being, you know, outside of canon where there's also a bit more freedom as well.
Oh, it's not outside of canon. This is part of continuity.
Oh, that's huge.
Yeah, like, it's not it's not abundantly clear, right? Like, it's not something where you read it and you're like, this ties into whatever. But Galaxy is definitely a character in the DCU that you and I know and love, and like a lot of the YA books are in their own little world. So I understand a lot of people assuming that this was that way, but no, they are, she is in the same world as everybody else.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Yeah, I think a lot of listeners, people listeners are going to be really split on whether or not that sort of thing matters. And I think it really, even if like somebody personally doesn't care one way or the other, like the reality is for a lot of people, like it's completely understandable that it matters to them that these characters exist in the same world as the other things that they're emotionally invested in, because it is a way of declaring a footprint. They're like, yes, we're real, we matter, and we're not just in this corner, like the world you care about and have been emotionally invested in as a superhero soap opera for however long in your life has us in it.
Right.
So like, even if you're like, who cares about corporate art? Like the reality is like people do. So since they do, like you're not going to have like people are not going to suddenly stop caring about, I don't know. It's contentious stuff in the community, but like I'm all about being realistic about what people care about. So I love also like the moment Kat talks like Kat's thoughts about Superman. I thought that was really insightful. She says that Galaxy or is or not yet embraced that name, but
Taylor,
is like, yeah, Taylor is like, what's it? You're from Metropolis. What's it like meeting Superman? And Kat saying like, you only see Superman if it's like the worst day of your life. Is a really real. It felt like a really real way to look at the character.
Yeah, we're so used to seeing superheroes on their level and what they go through, and that's great. But I really wanted to examine Kat as like someone who grew up in Metropolis and is like, what does that mean? And it means is like, if you've met Superman, something bad has happened to you because you needed to be saved. And like, that's a weird way to think about superheroes. Cause again, we've always thought of them on their own terms. And it's just something that, again, I like thinking about what ordinary people go through in these extraordinary circumstances. And it explains both Taylor's reticence to kind of be a superhero, and also exemplifies Kat's arc, because she's like, superheroes only show up when something bad happens, and then by the end of the book she's saying, you should really be a superhero. Like she's come around.
I mean, one of the great lines from the book from Galaxy is, being normal was never going to save me.
That's my with great power comes great responsibility moment.
Totally. Yeah.
Because I feel like that's something that I know I struggled with. And I've heard variations of that from other queer and trans people, is this belief that if we can just be normal enough, we'll be fine. And that's not true. Because you're never going to be normal enough, first off. But also, like, denying such an important part of yourself is just going to eat you up inside. So to have her be her moment and be like, what's going to save you is not conforming to what other people think you should be. Like, that was just the book as a whole, but also a really important, like, that's her superhero moment for me. Mm-hmm. And I love that moment.
Yeah, I agree. It really resonates. Let's talk about Pretty Clothes. Did you work on those a lot, or was that a lot of the work from your artist? And like, how do you guys work together when it comes to that kind of creation?
Yeah, I sent Jess so many clothing references because this is an important part of my process when thinking about characters. It's like, but how are they dressed? Mm-hmm. So I have all these reference images just for my process, and I put them in the script anyway. Like, here, looks like this. And it got to the point where we were restructuring a scene and we needed more. It's the where she's shopping for a homecoming dress, and we were restructuring it. And so we wanted, like, Jess wanted to do a montage kind of thing where you see different dresses. And it wasn't like they had dress ideas. They're like, so could you send me some dress ideas? Because I would like to do this, but I don't know what dresses to have. And I'm like, I've got you. It's okay.
I've been waiting.
Here you go. Moment. And just gave them a bunch of them. So yeah, I love dressing up my characters in cute little outfits. I feel like that's an important part of character in general. Like, how do these people dress and what do they choose? And especially in a visual medium, it's important to make sure everyone has a different silhouette, which Jess is genius about, but also everyone has a distinctive style of dress and a different way of dressing. And that communicates some of their character as much as the dialogue. So yeah, I loved all the little outfits. I sent so many from like fashion bloggers and like people I follow on Instagram and like all of this and that, and be like, and then Jess took that and put their own spin on it. And it worked out great. Like I had a Letterman jacket on Taylor for most of the book, and Jess wasn't into that and instead gave Taylor these amazing series of sweaters that I just love, that are colorful and different and great and say so much with the color palette. And so it's still the same kind of vibe, but it's more Jess, and that's great for me. I love it.
Well, it's great to have like two queer creators working together, you know.
Two trans creators too. Like that was the other thing. Like Jess is non-binary, and they really vibed with the story and like knew what I was doing. And so to have that was great. It was, you know, and then even the letterer, Ariana Maher's bi. And like, so it was like a very queer creative team. And to have the writer and artist both be trans, it was like perfect. It was like, I couldn't have asked for something better.
It's so great. Yeah. I mean, I just think we think about the importance of what you wear as character work, and I think in often a different way than a lot of other people do.
Oh, I didn't even consider that. Yeah, probably.
And it's just weird sort of, you know, the conflict of like trying to be legible and legible how and legible to who, you know?
Well, and it's all of this too is like, I'm a lifelong comics reader. And so what I'm trying to do is not the things that bothered me reading these stories growing up. And one thing I always hated was when characters like always wore the same thing when they were not in costume, or when they wore stuff that didn't fit with their character. A lot of female characters are needlessly sexed up. And like sometimes that's fine. Yeah. Like if you're doing Felicia Hardy, yeah, of course she's wearing a very sexy outfit. That's all she owns. But like some other characters, it doesn't quite fit. And like, yeah, I really wanted to be clear about what people were wearing, when they were wearing it, and how they were wearing it, because that was something that just always bothered me as a reader.
Same. You know, what makes a book like this like fit into the YA category? Because there's a lot. It's not just that it has teenage characters, although that's obviously a piece of it. Like, how does YA work as like when you're making something?
You know, I asked my agent at the time, what's the difference between YA and like middle grade? And what's the difference between YA and literary fiction? And she said, the difference between YA and literary fiction is that it's about teenagers. The difference between YA and middle grade is they get to have sex in YA. That was it. I don't know if that's true. That's certainly what she thought, and I'm not with her anymore as an agent. So we can discuss whether that's a good opinion or a bad opinion. I think my conception, because I did a huge amount of YA research before I started writing this, because I did want to get the genre right, is it's very emotion focused, is my understanding of the genre, in a way that it can still be a plotty book, but it's still very focused on the emotional quality of the lead characters. And those plots are in service of the emotions. And sometimes with more literary fiction, you have emotions in service of the plot, or you have a much larger thing, a much larger focus. And it's not just about one person's emotions, it's about many people's emotions. And I think with YA, you really get to drill down on one character, the lead, and their emotional process. And even if it's written in third person, it's still very much from one person's point of view. And I think that's valuable and fun and interesting. And middle grade is, I think, less engaged with why am I feeling these emotions, and more of like, I'm feeling with these emotions, how do I deal with them? But like YA gets to be navel gazy in a way I think other genres don't. And maybe that's wrong. I don't know. This is my first YA book. But I did do a lot of research because that's what I do, is I just drill down and like, I'm going to be an expert on this as much as possible. And the stuff I read, it's all very emotional, and it's in a good way, that it really kind of gets at the heart of what the main characters are feeling. And that's...
What YA did you... Oh, yeah.
And that's just the thing. I read a lot of John Green. I read a lot of Sarah Dessen. Sarah Dessen's great because all of her books are like similar, but wildly different. And so you can really, like, if you read enough of them, you can see the way they all kind of follow. And this is not a bad thing. Not necessarily a pattern, but an arc. But in different ways and in different catalysts that cause this arc. And though I definitely, that was, I think, the most instructive, was to read a bunch of Sarah Dessen, who's just a master at this kind of very wet, emotional storytelling. And I mean that in a positive way. I feel like everything I'm saying is negative because we don't value emotional stuff in media for the most part. It's like, but what's happening? And in YA, like, that's what's happening, is what's going on inside.
It's so crazy to me because, like, I mean, what, like, the emotional work is like what we're invested in. And I think there's just like bad tendency in some of the more clickbaity websites, for example, to just treat, or like with Wikipedia, to just treat everything like a series of plot points that you're going through. What is the point of that? Like, no, I don't think that's actually why people read.
I mean, it's why some people read. I think there's some people who really like a good plot. I think that's the beauty of literature, is there's so many ways to tell a story, and we have so many of them. And like, I'm really grateful to live now when we can tell, queer and trans stories unabashedly and boldly, in a way that we couldn't before. And like, that's so liberating and wonderful. But like, again, going back to what you're saying, like, some people love a good plot. Like, I love a good plot story. Like, the Spencer books are just a very plot-based thing. And if you read a bunch of them, which I did when my daughter was very small and I had to rock her to sleep every night, I just had the Kindle and just turned it down way low and read all of the Spencer books. There is like a glacial changing of the Spencer character. Like, who he is in the first books is not who he is in the later books, but it doesn't happen in one book. Like, the point of the book is this very plot-based journey. And that's, because it's a mystery, because it's a very particular type of mystery, in a genre. Like, it's a tough guy mystery. And those tend to be plot-based. So there's like, I don't want to say like that's a bad thing, right? Because that's definitely something that some people like, and it's definitely something that's worth reading. But also, it is fun for me, as someone who looks for emotional beats and like why characters do the things they do, to delve into more of an emotional genre.
Yeah. One of the other things I really appreciated from the book, when I first heard about it, Galaxy, the Prettiest Star, I was like, oh, I really hope there's a Bowie tie-in with this, because of the Bowie song Prettiest Star on Aladdin Chain. I didn't understand there would be, but like, and then there definitely was, and was very front and center. Talk to me about that decision.
Right. Well, when I write a teenage character, I don't want to say you, because everyone has their different process. When I write a teenage character, my first thing is like, well, what was I like as a teenager? What did I like? And one of the things that really defined my teenage existence was discovering 70s era David Bowie for the first time. And that was so perfect for this story, because it's a nice little mirror to the story where we have an alien pretending to be human, and David Bowie's Ziggy Stardust era was all about him pretending to be an alien. And then, but also that it was very queer and very kind of gender fluid, in a way. And that was a nice thing to be like, to showcase that this kind of narrative, this kind of person, is not new. Like, we're doing this forever, but like, also as a queer trans person, you might latch onto 70s era David Bowie and be like, yeah, that's like me, right? And it is, because he's not trans, but he is a shade of gay, and that's wonderful. And like, so when I heard that for the first time as a teenager, I was blown away about how just extremely gay it was, and how it made no bones about it. And that was just so beautiful to me. And so I wanted that energy in this book, and I wanted to be as unabashed as 70s era David Bowie. And I think I succeeded in that. But anyway, it was a clear touchstone for me growing up, and it was something I wanted to pull back and put on this book.
Well, you know, one of the things I really believe is that comics are, I did a panel about this at New York Comic Con one year, that comics can very much be a gateway for folks to learn about art and media beyond comics that they might not have encountered otherwise. And so I really love the idea of some young person who maybe is not familiar with Bowie at all, like discovering Bowie through this comic.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I hope so. Because also that's a shame that they haven't discovered him on their own. Because, it's really worth a while. But like, that's why like all the references are queer people. Like I wanted to give this idea of like, we don't live in a vacuum. Like there are queer people all around, like Walt Whitman and Sally Ride, who you may not consider queer people, but are queer people. And like, that's a part of the human experience.
That's right. You know, I also feel like a lot of people assume that folks don't care about music or art that isn't from their exact generation. And that is just so patently not true that I think it's really unfortunate that people kind of get forced and limited in that way in terms of what they think other people are interested in. I'm sort of on the extreme of that, but I think even people who do tend to like a lot of contemporary stuff also, especially if given the opportunity to find it, do have things that resonate, that either it's music from their parents or an older sibling, or they come through it from a movie soundtrack or a comic, like connecting with the past in art and obsessing about music and art that might be from quote unquote before your time is not uncommon at all.
No. I mean, like I got into Bowie because a friend lent me a mixtape and is like, here is not even a mixtape. It was just a recording of Ziggy Stardust. And I was like, here, you will like this. And I was like, I do like this. This is great. Yeah. And also I wanted to avoid with this book doing the thing that annoys me again in other medium is when you have a teenage character who lives in the present day, but they really like the music of whatever the writer liked when they were a teenager. I didn't want to put any 90s bands in there, which was music that I liked as a teenager, but I could put in a 70s band because that feels ancient. It's 50 years ago. And so it feels more universal. I considered using Janelle Monáe as an oral touchstone instead, but it didn't feel as timeless to bring in someone modern. And I liked how timeless it felt to bring in someone like Bowie, who is not only recorded this stuff 50 years ago, but just has such a career and a presence that like, of course you like Bowie. He's there.
I love Janelle Monáe also, by the way. But yeah, no, it felt really good to me as a person, like to see this. I mean, and like Bowie is throughout, like Bowie is the chapter titles, folks.
Yeah, we had some lyrics in there too. And we were told in no uncertain terms from the David Bowie estate that we could do that. And like, that's fair.
Yeah.
You can have you can use song titles. And you can use a tiny bit of a lyric. Like, okay. I will choose that carefully. That was it. And
the David Bowie biopic graphic novel couldn't use was not allowed to use extensive lyrics.
And like, I understand being very protective of that, and I get it. And I honestly think like the scene with at the party where Taylor's doing karaoke had the lyrics in it. And in the original draft. And then when we were told we couldn't use those lyrics, I was like, well, I've got this space to fill. So I amped up the narration because I had more room and could do that. And like, I love that scene so much more than if we had gotten to use the lyrics.
Oh, cool.
So it was a happy accident in that way. Or I guess a silver lining that looked like a dark cloud.
Right. Yeah. No, it's all about problem solving, like you said, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
So let's talk about the GLAAD Award nomination. What is the importance of?
Before we do
Sorry,
that, you
yes.
did promise your listeners that we would talk about the best era of David Bowie.
Oh, I just thought that the question answered itself. But yes, you may explicitly.
I've been thinking about this. Okay.
I thought
a response.
Maybe I was wrong. I assumed we'd right. Go ahead. Yes.
I mean, obviously, it's a question with two prongs, right? Because there's like, what is objectively the best era, and then what is my favorite era, which are two different things. Objectively, the best era is, as we've talked about, the early 70s era, because that is also the gayest era. So, like, absolutely, the best time is Ziggy Stardust, Aladdin Sane, all of that stuff, where he was really like doing some not only amazing stuff with songwriting, but also amazing stuff with performance and like really involving. I don't know if you've seen stuff from the Aladdin Sane tour, but it was nuts. It was like a Broadway show. So it was really just pushing the envelope in a way that I think he tried to do again several other times throughout his career, but never quite succeeded as when he was doing it at that time. So definitely 70s era, Aladdin Sane, Ziggy Stardust era, the best. Personally, I love the late 90s era, the Outside and Earthling era that a lot of people don't.
They don't?
Yeah, it's not thought of as like the best time because it was like when it comes off of like the Tin Machine era, which is not well beloved, and then he's trying to find himself again.
About that.
Yeah, and it's
more like a comeback era.
It's not quite his comeback era, which I think was Ours, really. And that was more of him getting back.
That is so funny. I completely, and it might be because of like the specific scene I'm from, but I completely view it opposite. I feel like nobody pays attention to Ours, and that Outside and Earthling work the comeback era. But I also I'm from like the goth industrial scene. So partnering with Trent Reznor is exactly what you do to be contemporary and relevant, obviously.
Yeah.
I also did get to see that tour, but like that is my perception.
I mean, I'm with you. I think the Outside and Earthling represents him trying a lot of stuff that didn't stick. Right. And like one of those was like partnering with Trent Reznor and him being super influenced by French techno at the time, which is a wild thing to choose. And then with Ours and then later albums, he kind of abandons that and goes back to the songwriting that he had done before. But it's this weird kind of dark industrial stuff that I loved and I think was an attempt to do something that ultimately he abandoned. And I think that there was a huge kind of embracing of Ours, which is different than Earthling by a wide margin. I remember that media blitz. And so maybe that's just my perception, where it seemed like everybody was embracing Ours. And while Earthling certainly got played on the radio, I don't hear it brought up as like a classic Bowie album, even though it's one of my favorites.
That's so wild. Well, I like literally never heard Ours until he died, and I was making sure that I hadn't that there was anything I had missed. You know what I mean?
Right. Like, I don't know if it's fondly remembered, but at the time it was like, Bowie is back, baby. He's doing sad songs. Get ready. There is a through line from Ours to Black Star that is very interesting, and you can see that. Though I think that Black Star is a little more honest, right? Because like so much of Ours is like it feels like he must have talked to some friends of his and be like, so tell me, what does it feel like when none of your dreams come true?
Oh man.
Because like, how is he possibly writing this from his own experience? Whereas Black Star does indeed feel like from his own experience. So I wonder, like, there's a certain sort of like training wheels element of Ours that you can see in Black Star. I think, again, I'll have to, I'm just talking off the cuff. So I may be making bullshit up, but I feel like that's true.
This is interesting. Yeah. Well, there you have it, listeners, the definitive answer and the personal answer alike. And also the Ilana Reid of history through the lens of DC goth scene. Oh my God. I have a Bowie tattoo myself. So this is all nice stuff that Aladdin Sane era. So yeah. And I've been telling I don't even know if I'll ever have the opportunity to mention this again. So I'll mention it here. I really wanted like my Jack Kirby Fourth World Broadway musical in which Bowie would play Metron. This was my...
I mean, oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Right? He's Metron. But like the whole Diamond Dogs and the Atomic Dogs at the Atomic Knights, like there's a lot of Diamond
There's
Dogs
a lot there.
in Armageddon. Like Fourth World New Gods dystopia stuff is like very Diamond Dogs. So
well, and it's concurrent, right? Like,
yeah,
the Kirby stuff happened in the 70s when like Bowie was doing it. Like that was in the water, and to look at the designs in the Fourth World and to look at costume designs that Bowie was doing, and to be like, I don't know if they were directly influencing each other, but they were being influenced by similar stuff because there is overlap. And
totally.
like, yeah.
Thank you for letting me have my moment there.
No problem.
I'm like, when would
I
this
want you
come
to know
up?
I
Who
agree
even
with you
knows?
100%.
Excellent. Thank you. So let's talk about the GLAAD Awards. What does it mean to you to be nominated for a GLAAD Award?
It's incredible. Like I don't even know what to say about it. Ultimately, it is meaningless because I didn't write this book to win awards. I wrote it so that it would be like I wrote it because I wanted it when I was a child and it didn't exist.
Yeah,
that is the main thing. And I've seen it in the hands of teenagers and children, and that is enough for me to know that it exists for them in a way it never did for me. That said, it's fun to see it up there with just some really brilliant books, and to have Galaxy be counted as like, this is also brilliant, or at the very least noteworthy, at the very least worth shining a spotlight on. And that's really, it means a lot to me. Yeah, I didn't expect it. This is also like a year where it's such a good year for comics, right? Like it was so good. There's so many wonderful comics that came out this year, many of them dealing with queer themes and trans themes, and is like such a crowded space, right? Like I feel grateful that Galaxy came out at all, and I was like, but they come out this time, and when all this beautiful work was being put out, and I was like, oh, I hope someone notices my little alien trans book, and they have, and that's great. And it says something that's in that category. There's not another DC book, right? Like that's all independent stuff, but there's Galaxy, and then there's the DC Pride issue. Now, and it's funny because it's like superhero stories, which is what DC publishes, are thought of as like lesser, right? Like they're bombastic, and they're they're not thought of as serious works. And so to have something that is a superhero story and deals with those superhero tropes, but does it in a very YA navel gazing kind of way, and to have that still be recognized is neat. Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing. It's amazing to be nominated. Like I wasn't expecting it. It would be really cool to win, honestly, but it's like, it's not something I'm counting on, because again, it's a great year for comics, and I'll probably go to something else. If it goes to DC Pride, I'm still claiming it because I was
there.
In
You go,
book.
Yeah.
But it would be really amazing to win that and have it recognized on such a big stage. But it is, again, enough to be nominated, and like people always say, it's an honor to be nominated, and sometimes that's true, and sometimes that it's not. But it is the true in this time. Because it's like, I honestly didn't think anyone would notice. I've written other books. Like I wrote Battle of Blood and Ink, and no one noticed that one. It just kind of flew under people's radar, which is fine. It's not good. That's not true. The art is great. Steve Walker, who drew it, did a great job, but it's one of those things where you look at something you wrote 10 years ago and been like, I would write this entirely differently now. So I don't want to say the book is bad, because Steve worked really hard and did an amazing job on the art. But it's just neat to have a book that not only people like, but also notice, and to read and see. And I love that it's this book. I love that this is the character that I will hopefully forever be identified with, because I love her. And I also partially own her, so I get to decide what happens to her to an extent.
I love that fact.
Yeah. Well, it was a nice little perk of the situation. It's just like, if there's something that DC wants to do with her that I don't like, I do get to talk them out of it. But for the most part, I've been really happy with her and what she's done and what they've done.
Who's a character that you would love to see her interact with from DC?
Well, therein lies a tale, because the original draft of this book had Ma Hunkel in it.
Oh, I love it.
I know. She's my favorite character in DC, bar none. She's like the first DC superheroine. She's the second superheroine overall, which is mind-blowing. And she's wonderful. And she's doesn't get the respect that she deserves, I think. Because if you read those old scribbly stories, they are so wonderful. And the character is so beautifully drawn and detailed in a way that I think people lose when they try to bring her into a modern context. Also, she's a big old dyke, and like, that's obvious to me anyway. So
that's a good point.
I wanted her in Galaxy and running a grocery store right there. And I was told there was I get told a lot from editors, like, there's too many characters, because I love characters, obviously. And I overstuff my casts, and they're like, can't have this many people in here. I'm like, oh, are you sure? Because, like, I grew up reading, Justice League and X-Men and Excalibur. So, like, a proper cast is one that's 12 to 15 people at all times. But that's not true. So I had to cut a lot of people, and immediately the character that was cut, one of the first cuts, was Ma Hunkel, because it was like, this character's not really adding anything to the story. And I'm like, well, I want her in, though.
No.
And
for folks who don't know, she's like the golden age red tornado.
Yeah, she's the golden age red tornado. She has a pot on her head. She's a stocky, like the term broad. When you hear a woman described as a broad, that's Ma Hunkel. She is a mouthy broad, and her origin is that she noticed that her kids don't listen to her, but they listen to Green Lantern. So she's like, oh, I just need to be a superhero and they'll listen to me. So she makes a costume, has a pot in her head with the eye holes cut in, and it's like, I'm the red tornado. And she comes into her kid's room at night and is like, go to bed, you little hellions. And they're like, right, you're a superhero. We will go to bed. And then she goes out through the window, of course, and then stops a crime on the street because it's happening in front of her and she doesn't care. She would have done it out of costume, but because she did it in costume, she's now a superhero. And it's like, oh, I like this. And started like fighting like Nazis, for one, because it's the Golden Age, but also corrupt city officials and various forms of organized crime. And she would do it the same way every time, essentially, which she would just charge in and mouth off and punch people. And I love that. And it's not a female character we get to see very often, like that type. And certainly not as, again, like we say, as a lead. She's usually a comedic relief, a side character or something. But I just love that here's this woman who is not drawn like a Barbie doll, who has children, is older, and is just rough and tumble. And just is like, I'm going to punch you in the face because you're an idiot and a jerk. And she's just such a brassy dyke. And again, that's not canon. This is me interpreting. To write her, I would make her a canon brassy dyke, which I don't even know if they would let me do, but that's what I would hope to do. And anyway, she was in there because I wanted to set up a non-powered hero, non-powered mentor with a powered apprentice dynamic, because I love those. I love it when there's like someone with superpowers and then a character who doesn't have superpowers, but who is a superhero being like, you rely on your powers too much. Here's how you survive in a fight. Like, that was a dynamic I wanted if we ever got a sequel. And like, I was told both that there were too many characters, that Ma Hunkel was not adding to the narrative, and also it was better for this book to only be original characters. I was like, all of that is true. I even like took her out of the plot, and I was like, I'll show you she's essential because I'm taking her out and you're going to miss her. And then I took her out and read the plot and I was like, no, you're right. She's not doing anything.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So I still want to have Ma Hunkel be her mentor and her be a queer, gender non-conforming woman. But we'll see if I ever get to do that.
That's very cool.
That's who I'd want. As far as other team ups, we've hinted at her having a friendship with Dreamer, which is always something I would love to write. I loved writing Alyssa Yeoh, so having those two team up to do something. Like the ideal book for me would be like a Birds of Prey relaunch with all trans characters and just have Galaxy and Dreamer and Alyssa Yeoh do stuff and like have oh no, what's her name? Victoria October being like the in the Oracle row.
In the chair,
yeah. She's the woman in the chair. I'd love that. If anybody at DC is like, what do you want to do? You get to do anything. Like that's my thing.
People would really enjoy that. So maybe that
would enjoy it.
Well, speaking of additional DC work, let's talk about the DC Book of Pride because we definitely had a lot of people asking about that.
Yeah, I love the DC Book of Pride. So this is a reference book more than anything else. It's got profiles of many of the queer characters in DC Comics. When I was approached to do this book, I was like, well, why aren't we doing all of them? Why are we only doing this number? And then I found out in my research it's because there's 200 queer characters and they didn't want to do a book with that was like a tome. So they were like, we're just sticking to these. I'm like, all right, fair. I got them to put in some obscure ones, which pleased me. I can't talk about the list yet because it's a wait and see when the book comes out kind of thing.
Sure.
But they have released that some obvious people are in that. Harley and Ivy are in it. Thunder is in it. All the canon queers that they're in there. Galaxy is in it because I made sure of that. And another perk of her being in main continuity because it's all main continuity people. Because we only had so much space, we were like, well, we can't use people from alternate realities. We're not doing future people from Legion of Superheroes. That's a whole nother book. I'd love to do a volume 2 of it, honestly, and pick up some of the characters we didn't include because there's so many and I love them all. I fell in love with so many characters writing this book that I didn't realize. Like I didn't care about the Blue Snowman before. And now they're just this wonderful little goblin person. And I'm like, yeah, hit somebody else with a wrench, you little weirdo.
That's so much fun. And this is definitely like a reference book that I think everybody's going to want to have on their shelf. And
yeah, it's amazing that it exists at all, honestly. Like here we have a book that's like celebrating all these queer characters and it's aimed at like a younger reader set. As like here, it's like the Brave and the Bold book that came out a few years ago that's talking about all the women characters that in DC. And to have this one just be about all the stripes of the homo rainbow because we have gay people, lesbians, bisexuals, there's non-binary people in there, there's trans folks, there's all of it is in there. And it's really nice to have a book with such breadth, to have all these characters and to see how many of them are leads, which is great. Like, and, but to also see like how many characters' stories are told in the spaces between the lead stories. And like we talked about earlier, and you have things like Holly Robinson meeting a nice girl at a convenience store, and then 6 to 10 issues later, they've moved in, and you never get to see their romance together, but it happened. And so it was neat. It was wonderful to research. It was wonderful to write. I just had a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I just know how much those kinds of guidebooks, or sometimes people pick those up before they even really get to pick up many comics because they want to know where to begin. And so I think it has an opportunity to be an intro place for a lot of people.
And it's it's nice to kind of like sum up their storylines and sum up who they are, and what they've done. And like, how do you, especially, I mean, continuity is so convoluted. So to have a nice little guidebook that very simply lays out these characters is great. And again, like I said, it was just, I love reading comics about gay people. So it was a wonderful thing to research. Frustrating, right? Because the DC followed the Comics Code Authority until like the early 2000s. And so that the Comics Code forbid like any mention of queerness, right? So a lot of these characters that are older than 20 years had nudge, nudge, wink, wink elements to their queerness and to their identity. And it's like, and that was uncomfortable to read, and to read it now and to see like what they were like people trying to hint at is both wonderful, because like even with these very repressive editorial mandates, these characters were still there and they were still existed. But also it's like, but they couldn't be out in the same way that say Galaxy is, because of a mandate that didn't even come from DC, that came from something that was started in the 50s and an outside organization. And then that has a certain like effect on how these stories are told. And you see later characters, like even after they stopped using the Comics Code badge, right? There's still this sort of nudge, nudge, wink, wink about who characters are with and what their relationships are. And it's nice to know that we don't have to do that anymore, but it was still like a little demoralizing to read all these comics and be like, yeah, this character is clearly queer. They're clearly queer. And like, you're not saying anything about it. And it drives me up the wall. Again, I'm glad we live in the time we do now, or we can have these books.
Yeah. No, I understand that feeling. And, really, sometimes you can really see the seams of where creators tried so hard to make something so clear and weren't allowed to. And then you can see the times where like it's the fans who are kind of reading into it, and you think the creators maybe don't even notice what they've done, Yeah.
And it's really affected the way fans look at comics. I think like I had people ask me about Galaxy, a character whose trans experience is the entire book and who is wearing a flat trans flag on the cover and who has sex with a girl in the book, if she is actually gay and trans, because we are so used to these kind of stories where it's been waved away, and like creators being like, I don't want to say that they're gay or trans because I don't want to alienate non-gay and trans readers. And we're used to that. We're used to this sort of wishy-washiness. And so like when you have something as blatant as Galaxy is, it's still looked at and like, well, are you sure though? Are we clear? Are we being clear about this? And but then you have things like Bruce Wayne getting his face very close to another male character's face. And everyone's like, oh, they're about to kiss. That's proof that Bruce Wayne is bisexual. And it's just like, we are so used to reading between the lines because of the history of queer suppression, right? That when we have someone who's absolutely on the lines, is that the opposite of between the lines? Let's say. So you have things that are on the lines, we're distrustful of it and we don't see it for what it is, because we've been trained by history. And that's a real shame. And it really kind of was visible reading these old books and seeing the ways that plausible deniability had to be in every action of these characters. And I'm glad that's not the case anymore.
Well, thank you so much for your work there. And I'm really looking forward to seeing it when is it going to be out?
It is going to be out in May, May 16th, I believe. And it's just a celebration of these characters and who they are and, their relationships, and like me trying to just like tell the queerest version of their stories and fill in the gaps that were left out. And in some cases I didn't have to do that. Like, the more modern characters like Jackson Hyde, like you can talk about his relationships with dudes because that's canon and on the page. And then there's other characters where it's like, whoa, if you piece this together, and I had to be more of a detective, you can see that. But all the characters are wonderful, like the ones we ended up as. There's some favorites of mine that didn't get in the book, which is sad. But I think the ones that are in the book it's a good representation of all the different types of queer characters that DC does, which are a lot. They're not necessarily all leads, and they're not necessarily gotten, in my opinion, enough of their story told, but they're there and they're queer and you should get used to it.
Well, before we go, you had a very funny post about Hawkgirl and her football preferences. Now, I am unclear on what football is and how it is played, and but I could tell it was very funny. So now I need your headcanon.
Sure. Well, I love Kendra in general because she is a mouthy broad, and we've talked about that's one of my favorite character traits already. But like, I loved her because she came into the JSA, which is run by grandpas, and she was like, I'm not going to listen to you just because you're a grandpa. I know how to be a superhero, and that's by hitting things hard. And I can do that and fly around on these wings. So lay off, old man. And I love a character with a bad attitude, I guess. So she's a bad attitude queen. She's got a killer right hook and a loud voice. And the JSA, when she was part of it, was headquartered in Philadelphia. She's not from Philadelphia, but she's obviously spent a lot of time there because she was with the JSA. And I just feel like the city would have embraced her. I feel like she's got big Philly energy from jump. And then the Philadelphia football team is the Eagles, which are in the Super Bowl today. In fact, as we are recording it, we'll see if they succeed in their Super Bowl attempts. It's anyone's game, as they always say. I'm rooting for them to win just because the city is insufferable when they lose. So I hope they do win. But last time they were in this, last time they were in the Super Bowl, the quarterback, I believe at the time, appropriated, in a good way, the Millwall football hooligan chant of "No one likes us, we don't care," because like a lot of people don't like the Eagles, and that's fine. They don't have to. We don't care. And I also feel like that's big Kendra energy because people don't like her.
Yeah.
Like she's like everyone's second favorite Hawkgirl. Like we all love Shira because she was in the cartoon. And like she's the one who's been Hawkgirl since the 60s. And it's like, who is this new person who doesn't quite fit in continuity right? And who has a bad attitude. And but I love her because of that. Like I love an underdog. I love I love characters that other people don't like. And if you can combine that with a mouthy broad, then like I'm sold. So Kendra is my favorite JSA person. And I feel like she would wear a t-shirt that says, "No one likes us, we don't care." So I photoshopped one onto her and it looks right to me. Like she would not care that no one likes her. Like that's not why she's there. She's not there to be liked. She's there to do a job, and that job is punching evil in the face. I also love that was her whole thing, right? Like Hawkman gets a mace, and for a long time, she just had armored gauntlets that she would just punch people with. I was like, this is so great. And then they gave her a crossbow, and I was like, this is not as cool as just like punching a bad guy right in the kisser. She's kind of written in a very masculine way, which again is like, I love a character who is not a traditional female character. And like, I think that's maybe why fans don't like her as much. Because she's brassy, and like even though she wore high heels for the longest time, she has this sort of masculine energy. Not that she's trans or even gay. She's been established over and over how straight she is, and that's fine. But like she has an energy that other female characters don't, and I love. And like sometimes that's softened because people forget that she's not Shira. And they write her as if she is. But like she's just this bad attitude queen, and we love a bad attitude queen in Philly. So when I was asked on Twitter who's my favorite JSA, I was like, obviously Kendra, and like, go Birds, which is what we say because the team Eagles has too many syllables, and we would just like to say one if we can, please.
Yeah, I mean, this means that she could have a team up with Gritty at some point.
Oh my God, if only, if only. I've been accused by people of like trying to make the DC universe more like Philadelphia, because like in the DC Pride thing I did, I put there was the Gotham Trans Wellness Conference, which is
is Philly, yeah,
which is based on the Philly Wellness Conference, right? Like, and like I've done this I've tried to do this before with other things, and people are like, stop trying to make the DCU Philly, and I will never stop.
Thank you. I'm fine with that. You know, I'm like a hardcore New Yorker, but Philly is one of my favorite cities that isn't this one. And I think that's totally fine. We have plenty of superhero stuff here. You know, you can totally have some stuff there. I support it. And obviously I would like to have Gritty and everything. So
sure. A Hawkgirl Gritty meetup would be beautiful.
Oh yes, totally. It's sheer chaos and drinking gravy from a gravy boat with a straw.
So yeah, I can see Kendra do that. I can absolutely see her do that. That's the thing. It's like she is a character who will like do crazy stuff like that because she doesn't care, and or not. She cares about very specific things, and like doesn't really care about her image, and I love that. And again, she's been the whipping girl in so many storylines where she has to suffer so that other people can have a heroic moment. And that is another thing that just endears her to me.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Tell our listeners, what's the best way for them to keep up with your work?
I used to say like social media handles, but I don't like social media anymore. I've been on it too long. Like I was an early adopter for a lot of stuff, and I've slowly been like devolving on that. So like, don't follow me on Twitter. I'm barely going to post anything.
Fair enough.
But there's always my website, JadziaAxelrod.com. I have a newsletter, tinyletter.com/PlanetX. My Instagram is PlanetX. My Twitter is PlanetX. I hopped on those sites early to claim those. Because my podcast used to be the voice of Free Planet X, which is still available to listen to if you want. Newsletter is probably the best. I'm trying to do that more and get in people because I'm a long form writer to begin with. So doing tweets was never something that came naturally. But yeah, follow me there, or just, buy my books. You don't have to follow me online.
Yes.
It's cool.
Folks can
buy Galaxy, buy the DC Book of Pride. It's a wonderful book. It's an absolutely beautiful book that I'm so proud to be a part of. There's more stuff coming down the pike that I can't talk about that is wonderful and you will love if you like Galaxy. Yeah. So like, that's the best way to follow me, is to buy my books.
Go buy the book. Go.
Please. Which people have been doing. It's being, I'm told, very successful in a way no one was expecting. So that's very exciting. So keep contributing to that is what I'm saying. It's also a beautiful book. Like Jess Taylor did an amazing job just making it look like nothing else on the shelves and really imbuing it with their own style and essence, and just you can feel the joy they had making it, which I really love. So it's a beautiful book to own. You should definitely own it if you like nice things, which, you seem like an erudite listener. You probably already owned it. Buy it for someone else then.
That's true. I like to get these books for my friends with kids and be like, you can read this, also you're a kid.
Yeah, it's a great book. I'm going to say it again. The more people buy it, the more DC will want me to do more stuff. And that's what I want to do.
Yes,
so
that is
by
how
all
it
means.
works. And so for our listeners, this has been Graphic Policy Radio. Very soon, Jadzia will be joining us on Deep Space Dive, the official Deep Space Nine podcast of Graphic Policy Radio. And she'll be joining us to talk about Kira. No, haha, that's not true. She's joining us to talk about Jadzia. I know, who could have possibly guessed? Her namesake, and obviously a favorite character. So I'm looking forward to doing that with you.
Oh, I am also looking forward to it. The only thing I can talk about more than myself is probably Star Trek. So
Love it.
I'm very excited.
And as for me, I am still on Twitter for however long it may take, but I'm also on Mastodon, and I have my handle Elana_Brooklyn. That's ELANA_Brooklyn on just about whatever social platform there is. So hopefully I'll be making that migration, but for now I'm still on the thing. And as always, we really appreciate your reviews for Graphic Policy Radio on whatever podcast platform you listen to. It really does make a difference. So please rate it, review it, and keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.